Welcome back to Big Asian Energy. Today, I am super excited because I don't just have any normal guest. I have a guest who is not only an activist, a nonprofit leader, a TEDx speaker, nonprofit political strategist advancing Asian American power and visibility, but a freaking knight. Can we just take a moment and acknowledge that we have a knight, Krista? Sorry, this is nuts. Clifford Robin Temprosa Lee. Tell me first and foremost that KOR behind your name, knight. What does that mean? Before I dive into the full bio and everything that you've done so far.
Yeah, so KOR means Knight Officer of Rizal, which is the second promotional rank in the Order of the Knights of Rizal. And um, Dr. Jose Rizal is the national hero of the Philippines. And so in the early 1900s, similarly after the Knights of Columbus, the Philippines government added a mandate, an amendment to the Constitution to say that this is an order affiliated with the government. And so when you're awarded, when you become a knight, it is considered a national award. Um, and it's built off of the tenets of patriotism, nationalism, and liberation. Whether that is on a revolutionary scale, whether that is through society, whether that's through collective consciousness, and so um, yeah, that's really what it is. So
I mean, you've got a lot of different things under your belt. I mean, and being a knight, I think, isn't even, I would say, the most impressive one. I mean, you have been the creator of Margins of, which is a storytelling media platform, which I hope that we get to dive into more today. You're a managing consultant of Dare to Change Consulting. You have, expertise in storytelling, governmental relations, organizational strategies. Let's start from just your background because I see that there's a common theme across all of this, which is really about your own culture and heritage. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how that plays a role?
yeah, so first and foremost, I'm an immigrant. Second, I'm multi-ethnic. I'm Filipino and Chinese. I came to New York and grew up in New York when I was young, but I also kept the lifeblood of what it meant to be a Filipino and a Chinese American in the United States. I had the typical story of going into pre-med, studying medicine. My parents wanted me to do it, and I dropped out, and I needed to find my own path, discover my own worth. And in the height of COVID and Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate, it led me to a calling in the public service. So I ended up running food pantry coordination, volunteering for myself for government events, and supporting what power looked like when it was led by people who look like us. That opened the door to me working in government for 3 years, doing civil rights electoral work, led me to working at large scale nonprofit policy where we fought to ensure that money was being invested into Asian nonprofits who deserved funding to deliver culturally responsive care to their community. I say all that because at any point in time, when you look up at those who are making decisions, they lived your story. They don't just know it, but they lived it.
That's a wonderful intro. There's a lot that I want to dive into around this topic, especially around the fundraising work that you've done. You've done an impressive, let's just say that. You've broken records in your fundraising work. So at Dare to Change Consulting, you've unlocked $30 million for AAPI nonprofits in NYC. I mean, how did you, and not to mention that you got one of the largest governmental grants ever awarded to a Filipino nonprofit. Can you walk us through how that happened?
Yeah. Well, it basically started off with me working at my prior role at the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. It taught me a lot of nuance on how to strategize, lobby, and advocate for communities, as well as make sure that as much as we're calling on people in power to fund us, we internally, as communities and nonprofit organizations, need to be ready to get funded. And what that means is having liquidity, having programs to scale, having the right infrastructure. And when I left my role, they were my first client and contracted me to do the work. And essentially, we led a portfolio of over 100 Asian nonprofits from the diaspora, Southeast Asian, West Asian, East, South Asian. And we basically were able to organize over 100 nonprofits to lobby City Hall, over 50 council members to tell their story, to tell them, hey, we need $100,000 for culturally responsive mental health work. We need $1 million to do domestic violence and trauma informed services. And the reason why we needed it was coming from the idea that exclusion in funding and policy has led us to get to a point where our communities are being excluded from services that are life-saving and life-altering because of language, because of cultural nuance. These nonprofits are geared to execute such services and direct programming in a way that no one else can do, not even the government can do, right? And so telling that story to people in power and letting them know that people's lives are on the line and people are dying
Hmm.
really was the thread of emotion that we needed to spark to hit those numbers. As for the
Mm.
$1 million investment that came from years of advocating to government officials to say that the Filipino community is here. The Filipino community is contributing socially, economically, and culturally, but we do not have a community center that collectively uplifts our needs and houses our concerns and our joys and a lot of our battles. So that in work and in correlation with Assemblymember Stephen Raga, the first Filipino state elected official in New York, I worked with our organization and NAFA to write this grant and to make sure that Congress member Grace Meng did support it. And now we're working on a multi-year, multi-phase campaign to keep adding these commitments and pledges so we can build out a robust and comprehensive center itself.
Wow, that's very powerful. What do you think are the biggest barriers that Asian American nonprofits typically face when it comes to self-advocacy or trying to get that kind of funding?
You know, there's more than my fingers can count, right? We can talk about burnout. We can talk about uh, very ineffective infrastructure. We can talk about long board meetings. We can talk about the lack of liquidity and fundraising from our community to our own community organizations. We can talk about a lack of tech and infrastructure. We can also talk about how a lot of our organizations are siloed generationally. We have subspaces where it's really run by uncles and aunties. Then we have spaces run by entirely millennial and Gen Z. Um, but when we think about it, the way that communities evolve is that once they get into a space, the first thing they solve is social issues, right? They solve the need for a community to gather and to celebrate culture. Next on the list is be able to provide trauma informed services. But we can't evolve to do preventative work and trauma informed work if we can't find stable and fundamental ground as a nonprofit. And so when people ask me what are the biggest barriers, I say everything. There's not enough support. There's not enough internal capacity. There's not enough funding. There's not enough collective
Mm.
consciousness that's being pivoted and shifted to make sure that our organizations are moving into an industry standard, right? And it takes a lot of legwork, but most of the time, what
Mhm.
I've seen, it takes folks convincing that they need to invest in themselves, invest in their nonprofits. The same as life coaching, actually.
Mm. Mm. I think this is one of the biggest pieces is us and our communities investing in ourselves, investing in that because you're right, we are facing so many external barriers as it is constantly in governmental programming, political dealings, and as you said, there are so many different versions of barriers that we're confronting. How do we, if you could speak, if you had a megaphone that could reach every single, Asian American, Asian diaspora, what would the messaging be that might influence them?
If it was to a collective rather than targeted, I would say put your money where your mouth is. As easy as that, right? Put your money where your mouth is
Hmm.
because we can't, as a community, keep complaining that the system doesn't work for us, which, yes, it does not work for us, and yet not do the entirety of work that it needs, that we need in order to change the system. Meaning,
Mm.
if you want to donate, don't donate one time, donate monthly. If you want to volunteer, don't volunteer one time, volunteer all the time. If you are tired of seeing that our communities are being excluded, don't just post it on social media. Delve in, get knowledge and informed on policy. Talk to your local government officials, right? So if I had a megaphone to
Mm.
say, "What's my message to community?" If you're waiting for everyone else to speak out for you, then you might as well just not speak out at all. Get out there.
Mm. That's really powerful. What a call to action. Of all the various causes that you've worked on and supported, including now, what would you say has been the most, let's say, impactful for you?
I think it's not linear. I think what we do
Mm.
as a consulting firm, as movement driven work, is strategy is liberation. So whether I support an Indo Caribbean queer identified nonprofit to provide culture responsive services or work with Filipinos to conduct civic engagement work, it's not that it's one moment that's impactful. It's the movement we're building that's built off of solidarity, that's built off of collective consciousness, that's built off of the idea that it's great to have values and it's great to have integrity, but values and integrity without action is just going to drive us downwards. And so every moment in which we get to support and build up a more powerful and effective body and movement is exactly, that's the milestone itself. That's what keeps us going, keeps me going.
Hmm. Absolutely. Is there any of the main things that you've been, working on that when you're taking a look at, you're kind of wishing more people knew about this particular issue? Because I think generically, we all know there are so many different places where we need help, we need support, especially in nonprofit work. But it can be a little bit overwhelming for an average person who is still trying to balance their own life, their own, careers to find out about these different
Yeah.
things. How do we get better? Um, I think the best word is how do we get better informed about these things? Where do we go?
I think if we want to make a change, we need to take initiative, and that means research, right? It means doing your due
Hmm.
diligence. You know, I you know, a lot of the times there's a lot of great nonprofits out there, but they're not being reached because they're a nonprofit that was started 30 years ago that maybe the millennial and Gen Z market doesn't know about because the only nonprofits they work with are the young ones that their tech friends, left private sector to start. And so
Mm.
my advice is go online, go on Instagram and look up these hashtags and these issue areas of I want to support a Muslim empowering ending domestic violence nonprofit. What are the ones in New York that we can find, or what are the ones in Canada that we can find? This is not their fault. This is the periphery, right? Not everyone's born to be working in the public sector. A lot of folks need to be at a 9 to 5 and need to have a job that pays the bills, which is great. But find out yourself what are the values you align with, because I can assure you there is a nonprofit that's going to be there to support them. And don't get involved in a nonprofit
Mm.
that you are not fully interested in committing to, because it's more work for them to chase you around for you to just show up and say, hey, like I'm here every single weekend, right? So if you're not ready to commit all the way, do the little steps, and the little steps is the research and diligence until you find the one you want to commit to. It's like a relationship. It's like dating
Mm.
around. You can get to know what you're interested in, but at some point you really need to go all in and take initiative and commit to it.
Mm, I love that. I like the dating analogy because I definitely think it's true. There are so many different fits in terms of a lot of these startup type nonprofits that we can support, but knowing the one that best fits us, especially aren't aligned with our values, are aligned with our heritage and the things that we really care most about, can be a little bit of a challenge. Love that. Go date the charities, date the nonprofits. You recently gave a TED Talk. Can you tell us a little bit about what you talked about and what did you dive into?
Yeah. I talked about knowing your worth beyond face value. And what that really means is when you look at a $10 bill, what do you see from it? Right? Do you see that you can buy boba, you can buy chai, you can buy matcha, maybe coffee, you can buy tea, right? So culturally, we prioritize different products and services, but depending on our environment in which we are raised. Then we have to take a step further to
Mm.
say, well, if you were given $10, are you going to spend it? Are you going to save it or invest it? So I spoke to a bunch of young professionals and college age individuals to talk about the lens of rediscovering and reclaiming your worth, being an immigrant, being maybe Asian, where your family and friends and everyone around you was telling you to be a doctor, be in the medical field. It's the only way to be successful. But you need to take the step back to say, what's my constant of worth? Is it a true constant that I'm reclaiming, or is it a constant influenced by society? We brought it back to the equation. And if for folks in the crowd who, understand algebra, took calculus, y equals mx plus b is the equation to find your worth, where y or your worth is equal to or defined by the variable of how others see you plus the constant of how you see yourself. But most of the time in society, the constant of how we see ourselves is already predominated by influences of the environment, right? And so we broke down the exact nature of what it is to reclaim your worth. And what that really looks like is take a look and take a step back to see what is your values versus what do you feel like everyone else is portraying on you. That means you need to ask yourself, I want to help people. Great. You can help people by studying medicine, by being in law. Uh, but how do you want to help people? Right. So it's always getting the derivative of the formula to make sure that at the baseline of it itself, you'd identify change or progress or success as something you innately are passionate about, not anyone else's passion.
Hmm. I love that. And the fact that you were able to turn that into a calculus
I failed
equation.
calculus. Part of the story was me failing calculus, dropping out of medicine, telling my parents that I changed my major and joined a fraternity and, not knowing what I wanted to do or where to go. I literally was sitting there saying, what am I doing with my life? Like, I don't, and then I found out that making a change in the world is actually what I want to do, helping people, helping move systems.
I love that because I think that there are so many young people today, and I speak to many of them who share the same confusion because there is a sense of, I want to help, but where do I start? What do I start looking for? And what exactly is my purpose in it? If you could go back a few years, or maybe if you could talk to somebody who's younger now, what would you say to them aside from, giving them that formula?
I would tell them to I would tell them to burst the bubble and leave the friends that you have behind for just a few moments. I would tell them to burst your bubble and make new friends who have different interests. It's like growing up in a Filipino or in a Chinese community, and I think a lot of folks listening probably did. For 2 months, make new friends. Don't hang around the typical Filipino community you do or Chinese community you do, and ask yourself, do you actually go with the grain? Or do you actually feel like maybe you were just consumed or maybe a herd mentality was being placed on you that you just had to do it, right? It's like Filipinos, and this is a stereotype, right? We can play basketball, we can sing and dance, and we love karaoke, whatever, we love that stuff. But is that is that all you are, right? And you can't do that. You can't learn about more about who you are unless you really burst your bubble. Um, so that's my advice. For 2 months.
Mm.
For 2 months, just
I was that something you did for yourself? I mean, it sounds like it was, but
yeah,
it may have gone a lot longer than 2 months.
yeah. So essentially, my journey was that I grew up in a very Latino and black and brown community in the Bronx in New York, and I didn't have a
Mhm.
Filipino community until I was about middle school or high school, and I soon realized that that community was deeply, deeply toxic. From the uncles and aunties who would gossip about the kids to the kids themselves who literally their identity was really defined by the herd, right? So by the
Mm.
time I got to college, I kind of left my Filipino community behind. I joined an Asian fraternity, a South Asian fraternity. So a lot of my brothers were actually Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Bangladeshi, and I then became a quote unquote minority in that larger setting. And I learned so much about empathy. I learned a lot about trying to be responsive to the needs of others and those around me. And I didn't stop there. I found my place in that community, and then I started getting more involved in the larger Asian community work, understanding the Caribbean, Indo-Caribbean experience, the Southeast Asian experience. Slowly, I found my way back into the Filipino community, but I took all of what I learned to start pushing, threading the needle, moving systems, and seeing that, okay, this isn't really just a model that affects kids growing up in the United States or here. It's a model that affects how we advocate for public good because that bubble that I'm talking about that needs to get bursted is the silo that we live in where Filipinos don't show up for the Chinese community, let alone the South
Mm.
Asian community, let alone the West Asian community. And so innately as a collective, all of us live in bubbles that need to be bursted. And so I take a lot of humble humility and pride knowing that I take so much satisfaction knowing that I can explore different cultures in the Asian diaspora, but be able to say that, hey, like we can find ways to connect and fight for a commonality here.
Mm. I love that. That's really powerful. Do you find that your cross-cultural or bicultural heritage, or perhaps tricultural, depending on how you include it, played a big role in your upbringing when you were growing up?
It exactly is the pivotal role because I remember growing up, and this was in the TED Talk where I didn't know if I was Asian or American because I am an immigrant. I grew up in a very immigrant Asian household, let alone I didn't know if I was Filipino or Chinese, and I felt like I had to choose I didn't relate
Mm.
to the Chinese community because of, the diaspora that I'm in is the Hokkien people. Meanwhile, the Filipinos, especially growing up here, did not know that being Chinese is a very normal identity to have as a Filipino experience. And then everyone else around me kept on saying, "Oh, like, what are you Korean? You don't look Filipino. You don't even look Chinese. What languages do you speak?" And I really just was so lost. It got to a point where I literally denied my Chinese identity growing up. I remember my grandma or my amma would always tell me, "Oh, we're Chinese. We're Chinese. You're half Chinese." And I would say, "No, I just want to be Filipino." And,
Wow.
you know, when you're young, it's very easy to say that. But then also sometimes it's easier to just say that, to pick one side and not understand the complexity of it. But I was able to embrace it and understand that it is a powerful identity to have. It's not common to be multi-ethnic, especially as an Asian American in the East Coast, but it's exactly what compels me to burst the bubbles of all of our community to say, "Hey, we can fight. We can fight for each other and with each other, right? For a good."
And I think that's one of the core things that we were just addressing, right? The idea that there's so many of us who are in these silos, in these bubbles. It is true, unfortunately, that when I am chatting with a group of, let's say, Chinese Americans, we don't usually connect to other groups of diaspora, of immigrants, or whatever it is that they are experiencing or identified as. There's a little bit of, oh, we're here to help ourselves, and then that's it. And as somebody who crosses those barriers and crosses those bridges and builds, if anything, these bridges, how have you found it to try to reach people who are in those silos to get them out?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because one of my great experiences and memories I have in working in the political sector is I had a bunch of Chinese community leaders ask me, "Clifford, how do you feel like you feel safe walking around public housing? Do you feel like you get looked at? Do you feel like people judge you?" And this is coming from folks who are trying to describe walking around in a community of Black, Brown, and Latino, neighborhoods. And you know what I said?
Mhm.
I said, no matter where you are, no matter where you come from, no matter what race or ethnicity you are, I believe people want to be housed. People want good jobs. People want their kids to graduate college and be able to contribute and be self-sustainable. What makes you think that because you have a different race or ethnicity as someone else, they don't want the same things as you?
Mm.
And it opened their eyes to say, okay, like, yeah, maybe they do want the same things as me and they want exactly what we want, which is to be loved, to be cared for, to live in a system of a care economy is what we call it, where everything is, whether it's services to government to public systems, it's rooted in the idea that everyone should be taken care of. And as a human, I don't believe anyone wants to see someone else be unhoused, be hungry, be sick. I think there's a grace and a nature to humanity that we have to give credit to, and that is that humanity is inherently good.
I mean, that's absolutely the hope, right? I think especially right now, we're definitely feeling a little bit perhaps thinner on the side when it comes to trusting the goodness and compassion of humanity these days. The news certainly has not helped much in that regard. And do you ever experience any kind of compassion fatigue, or as you mentioned before, burnout is a major problem? Do you ever feel like that?
No, I'll be very honest. I think the reason why I don't feel compassion fatigue or burnout is because what compels me to move forward is it's not the money, it's not the
Mm.
outcomes, it's the process. It's the process of seeing people be filled with hope, smiling, be able to say, wow, like I believe in you. And then the challenge back is let's believe in each other, right? I'm one person. I don't want you to place me on a pedestal. The only thing you should be placing on a pedestal is yourself and how you treat others around you and inspire others in the same way you want me to inspire you. That's the challenge I get back. And so, because I see that so often where the community is celebrating, the community feels like they're growing, they have pride. Every time I feel down, I have
Mm.
100 more reasons to get back up.
That's very inspirational.
I hope
One
so.
of the projects that I first got to connect with you on was people who have lived it. which I still have the name card and I remember following. By the way, tell us the Instagram so that we can get people to follow this. This is such a cool project.
We Dare to Change. Dare to Change Consulting is the name of the company. However, we all need to dare to change, and it's built off of the idea of hope and making systems that can outlast ourselves.
That was really powerful. When it comes to this type of work, be it nonprofit consulting work or any of the projects that you've worked on, what would you say is the most surprising thing that most people might not be aware of when it comes to nonprofit work, especially around getting funding?
I would say what I'm more surprised of is how much passion these organizations have and the willingness that they have to make it intergenerational. I think a lot of the times, especially being Gen Z millennial, we try to create a barrier or we feel like there's an invisible barrier between us and then the uncle and auntie generation when it comes to family associations or nonprofits or organizing. But they actually want us to get involved, but their process and thinking of having us be involved is you need to be committed and loyal to the cause and you will earn your flowers. Meanwhile, the Gen Z or millennial perspective is if we don't feel validated in a certain amount of time, we're gonna walk away. Right. And so what's been surprising to me is marrying this concept together of these uncles and aunties are so willing to change their nonprofit infrastructure. They really are. But they are just waiting on the next generation to be as committed to the mission as they are. And I think that's what stops
Mm.
them from changing or pivoting. It's they feel like there's no succession planning. And that's part of what we do too, right? We create pipelines to make it more available of Gen Z millennials to have us to pipeline into their nonprofits. And the second thing that I find so surprising is that they are willing to invest in themselves. They just feel like they need to see someone who's willing to see uh, that they're willing to invest in. Before coming into this field, my biggest concern was, ooh, like I know nonprofits have money, but will Asian nonprofits be willing to invest in themselves? I was, 95% of me was like, I don't think so. Slowly and slowly, I'm hearing a lot of them say that we want to see the change we want to be, but we
Mm.
just felt like we couldn't trust anyone to do it. Going back into the idea that everyone they spoke to, they didn't look like them. They couldn't understand that, hey, there's a reason why we need to do Lunar New Year celebrations and we need to ask for $10,000 for it versus someone who doesn't look like them will say, hey, you know, I don't really know what Lunar New Year is, but we'll charge you $30,000 to do X, Y, and Z. Right.
Right. So having that understanding is such a big part of it, such an important part of it. And I think it goes often under recognized or underutilized to realize that community support where there's cultural understanding, cultural alignment is such an important component of getting people on board and really driving that energy forward.
Yeah, and what I really appreciate about our firm is that we don't like to call clients clients. We call them community because we build an ecosystem. Because going back into bursting bubbles, when you join Dare to Change and when you dare to change with us, we dare to change the way that you view impact, and that means bringing in connecting a Filipino American legal defense and education fund, which we got funding for to do Know Your Rights workshops with with an Indo-Caribbean nonprofit, right? So that they now are bridged in terms of how they want to impact the people where before they may not have had a chance to work together, right? Because there's no convener of that. And so as much as I like to say that, I started the firm to make money, I did start the firm because I couldn't find a job, in between. But my passion for continuing the firm is that we get to really connect some great stories, create or connect great leaders together. And we're building something that we don't need to fear exclusion within, right? We're
Mm.
inclusive and we're including every single change maker into the ecosystem.
I love that. That's very powerful. I want to come back to the thing you were talking about before, which is the generation gap. Because I definitely see it. There is a generation gap, right? There's the OGs, right? The grandparents, the parents, the uncles, the aunties who really led the charge in a lot of these movements. And then there's the newer generations, and the newer generations are seeing a very different world. They experience different stories of what it feels like to grow up as part of the immigrant, as part of the Asian diaspora and the experiences. Have you found it difficult to bridge that gap of understanding?
Yeah, I have. I have. And I think that has come with the idea that we need to be empathetic of the lived experience of both aisles, right? I and this is just from observation, the uncles and aunties are so hardcore. They're so willing to stay on for 5 hours for board meetings because they created what they didn't have when they came here or grew up in this country. The perspective of the next generation is that they are handed the privilege of the blood, sweat, and tears that everyone else before them worked so hard for. So innately, the passion or the commitment or um, the ferociousness, right, is not the same because of that level of privilege. And so having conversations with younger generations and the uncle, auntie, grandparent generations, I really hit the ground running to say that you cannot blame as much as you want to blame the other generation or the other side of the aisle for why things are not moving. You need to ask yourself, are you letting go of or understanding the trauma that they received, right? It's the same thing as parents, right? I don't blame my parents for going through a divorce. I don't blame them for getting into financial debt. I don't blame them for working hard because I understand that they had to, so that I didn't need to at this point in my life. But a lot of folks, and you see this in parent-child relations, I think at times, there's a hard time with understanding that trauma and those lived experiences that we kind of just the rest of our lives blame our parents for everything. And vice versa, our parents will blame the children to say, why can't you understand or why can't you just, understand what we went through? And you see the same thing in Asian organizing in the community. That same trauma has kind of bled into all of that.
Wow. That's there is something that I think is the underlining fear of those who are different from us, as you said, even generation gaps. And I feel like there's almost a little bit of distrust sometimes, right, between the older generation and younger generation. And I don't mean that as like a deep sense of distrust, but just like well, I don't understand those particular values that we went through, that they're holding on to, that they've experienced. As you said, they were the initial trailblazers that opened up these things, but the younger generations might be feeling a different set of experiences. So, coming back to that experience, that particular thing, what do you think are the younger generations getting that the older generations don't get, and vice versa?
Is this in terms of like generational identity? Is this in terms of family life? Is this just in terms of, being working as a community?
I think working as a community was really where I was getting at, but I would love to hear any of the other ones if you have opinions on them.
Yeah. I guess to start the community, I think the older generation wants the younger generation to know that you're not going to forget the legacy we left, and you're just not going to rerun the systems that we created. And I think that's true, right? I think a lot of the old generations, and you can't blame them, they're afraid that once they hand it over, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be as empowering or impactful. So I think it's about understanding their work and honoring them. Uh, and I think vice versa, what the younger generation wants the older generations to know is that we're not here to push you out. We're not here
Mm.
to come in and exclude you. We're here to add our value, knowledge, and expertise. Um, and we need to find a place where you may not agree exactly with how we do things, but you agree with the impact that we want to make. Right. And that's just the nature of politics, right? That's the nature of the dialectic where two opposing forces can come together to create something beautiful if they just let it happen. Right. In terms of personal, and this is a call out and a shout out to my parents, and both my step parents, that I have never forgotten the amount of sacrifice that you've ever made to get me to where I am. And as much as a lot of the times you might feel like, or they might feel like I don't recognize all of what they've had to sacrifice. I do know and appreciate that you left the Philippines when you were 22, when you had me as an accident to give me a really great life, and that you work days and nights to give me this opportunity. And I am the reason that I do what I do. And I think for a lot of folks who can resonate with me is we do things to pay back our a very loving debt to our parents because we want to take care of them. But the way that it surfaces then becomes we also have to work And this is the nature of capitalism. For us to pay that debt back to our parents, we then need to work the same amount of hours and times where we might be too busy at times. And I'm not saying that's an excuse or not saying that that's okay, but we're also learning, right? You know, we're learning how to unbreak and destigmatize all this trauma. And I think, yeah, I think I definitely yapped. I don't talk about my family stuff a lot because, and this is the first time, and this is great. You know, like I'll tell you, I was awarded on Saturday the Youth Leadership Award of the Knights of Rizal, and I teared because my dad. For the first time in my life, and it's the first time ever, my dad was called on to create the speech for me. And I teared because oh my, I'm gonna get a little emotional now too. He never talks about how proud he is of me. He and for a very long time he didn't know what I did for work. He only just started recently coming to my events. His specific line that made me tear was, you know, at 24, my greatest accomplishment was having you. My greatest accomplishment was having you, and at 24, you have surpassed me. And that made me tear because I will never feel like I can surpass my father, and nor that I ever will. But it just it pulled a heartstring on me.
Oof. I felt that. Oh my gosh. Because that's the ultimate, that's the ultimate
That's the
compliment.
ultimate, like, that's like,
That's
oh
it.
my
It
God.
doesn't get higher than that. You got it. I'm
Yeah.
proud of you. Pass me. Wow. That is virtually unheard of.
Has
Yeah.
me a little emotional
What?
now.
Yeah, I love it. This is the place to feel it. Um, what has it been like as that journey has come through? I mean, there's so many different layers we can tap into to kind of take a moment now and reflect on the past few years. I mean, you've accomplished so much at this point. How does it feel like?
I'll be honest with you, I've been struggling with that the past however long because I'll tell everyone, and I'm proud of this, my biggest, like, the biggest lesson I've had to learn in life was knowing my own worth. Ironic because I
Mm,
gave a TED talk about that. Ironic because I have a consulting firm where I need to value my own worth, but for a long time, I didn't know what my worth was. I didn't know what I deserved. I didn't know, you know, I was the type of person where I felt like I needed to add value into people's lives. I needed to pay for people. I needed to show up all the time and never set a boundary as to maybe I'm just worthy for myself. And when I look back at the journey, you know, I can tell you that I never have given myself credit because I always feel like there's a lot more to do, a lot more for me to do and the community to have. And so that's actually a really great question because I've been thinking about it for the past few weeks, and now I say, wow. And I can tell you where it really hit me. The last Thursday, I spoke at Amazon on their API panel event. And I remember looking at the crowd, looking at the nonprofits in the crowd and the Amazonians of the crowd. And when they announced my headshot and my bio, I looked up at the big monitor that said Clifford Temprosa Lee, founder of Data Change Consulting. I remember looking to my business partner and saying, I don't know what it is, but I feel like I'm peaking. And by peaking, I really mean like, wow, like in my wildest dreams, I would have never imagined someone who dropped out of pre-med and medicine, someone who uh, is an immigrant, someone who didn't know what they were going to do in life, now speaking in front of this panel. And I think that because of all of the layers of what's been going on the past few months, personally and professionally, I'm starting to understand my worth. And I think that's my biggest
mm,
shout out to the crowd. The only way you'll ever give yourself credit and validation is you first understand the worth and the journey that you've been through. And my journey has been a lot of mistakes. I've made so many mistakes. I have made so many mistakes in my life. But you know, you get back up. You tell yourself, hey, one mistake doesn't define you, but you do need to move forward and define how you want to treat everyone else and what you do in your life. Treat it with love, with kindness, with chivalry, treat it with integrity, with dignity, with morals. And that's exactly the worthiness that you will attract, that those values will come back into you. You feed values into life and life will feed values back into you.
I think we just had our mic drop moment right there. I don't think that emotionally we're going to be able to top that in this recording.
That's what big Asian energy means. Like that is the, for me, that's big Asian energy, man. Like
Hell's yeah. Hell's yes. That's exactly what it is. Unapologetic self-ownership of your worth. And what an incredible share. Thank you so much for dropping that. It was truly a very powerful moment of just seeing that journey of transformation, all the milestones that you've hit along the way, all of the changes, all of the people, all of the ways that you've been able to make an impact in the world around you. How do people find out more about you, about your consulting, anything else?
Yeah, you can reach out to me on Instagram and social media. It's Clifford Temprosa, especially on Instagram. You can find out at wedaretochange.com, which is our website. I'm very open line and I don't believe in exclusion. And so if anyone wants to reach out to me, whether it's scheduling a meeting, talking advice, just let me know and I'm there for it. And I don't know if this is a time to have that one piece of advice for the audience. My advice is also, and I didn't get to touch on this, is when you're figuring out how you want to make your impact, it's okay to not know how you want to do it, but make sure you have an end goal. My biggest reflection on this is when people asked me 2 years ago, do you want to run for office? You should run for office. We want you to run for office. 2 years ago, I would say yes. Me now, my biggest question would probably be, I want to make change however way the people want me to make a change. If that's running for office, so be it. If that's being a consultant, so be it. But the biggest growing lesson I've had is that it's not my decision, right? So whether it's myself wanting to run for office, it's not my decision to say, hey, I deserve to run for office. Because I've come to realize that, and again, I say this as someone who's single, when I get to that point in life, I'm going to ask my partner and my family and my kids, Are you okay with this?" And that goes back into my learning and lesson to the audience, which is when you decide how to make your impact, make sure that those around you are supportive in the way you want to contribute to the world. Because if they're not, if your closest are not in support of what you're doing, there's either something wrong there or you're not ready to do it.
Hmm. Now, I know that this was a last thing, but I want to dive into that a little bit more because it sounds
Yeah.
so interesting, right? So, what you're saying is that if the people around you, let's say that your partner, your family, because I think this is probably a fairly common occurrence that somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to quit med school so I could go and, go into politics or nonprofits." I imagine there's going to be a few people who run into parents who are like, that's not going to happen." So,
Mhm.
what do you mean by that? Like, how would they deal with that in this context?
I mean, you either need to take it and understand that their criticism of you might be based off of their perspective of you in the past, going back into your concept of work, right? Like if for your entire life you're saying, "Oh, I wanted to be a doctor," and all of a sudden you're saying, "Wait, you want to go into politics?" There's a reason that they have that mentality on you, right? That's might be the mentality of you portrayed a different identity to them, or they see you in a different light. And so going back into reclaiming your identity, you need to make a decision. Am I going to push through with my idea and my concept and how I want to change the world and, you know, prove it to others that this can work? Or is what I'm going to do going to impact those around me so much that it might actually lose my relationships with them?
Mm.
And those are
That's a
common
really,
occurrences. Yeah.
that's a really tough question for people to answer.
And I think for a lot of folks, that then becomes a deciding factor of am I willing to let go of my family, my relationships, because I believe in this
Mm.
so much, that's which is valid, or will you have such a supportive family relationships and friendships that say, "Hey, you do what you got to do. We believe in you."
Beautiful. Thank you again, Clifford, for sharing all of your wisdom. What a beautiful journey and such a powerful message that you have that you continuously show up for others for. Um, we have an incredible. Okay, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think I already did ask you where to find you. Uh, aside from your current projects, what is up for you next? What are you most excited about?
I'm going to be in the Philippines in July and August. I'm going to be speaking at a conference about Chinese migration from the Philippines to the United States and about the work we do to build power. But I'm most excited with the idea that for the first time in my life, I'm not going home for family, which also I am. I'm going home with a sense of purpose and direction to the country that I was born in, that I love, that I'm there for business to speak at a conference, but also I want to tell this to the audience. I'm trying to work on a social incubator cafe in the Philippines where we could ignite young people to become nonprofit civil rights business leaders and connect them to the United States, to the diaspora here. And I say that because I don't believe in scarcity. I believe that that idea should be an idea that efforts should start entertaining for their own country, for their own people. And so I don't know. It's only May, and I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities. And I guess what I'm really looking forward to is meeting more like-minded people and challenging the status quo, understanding that, hey, if we really wanted to, we can change the world. Even if it seems dim, we can be the light that shines the brightest and a glimmer of hope for any darkest corner out there.
Whew. Beautiful sign off. Can you tell that Clifford is a professional speaker and incredible at what he does? Thank you so much. I'll make sure to have all the links, all the data in the show notes for anyone who want to find out more about you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Of course, thank you, John. Thank you so much. Look, sending some peace and love to everyone out there.